Engulf them in pain!
Today on Preview Paints, I'm going to show you how I painted the Salamander Saturnine Dreadnought. Hi everyone, and welcome to another paint tutorial. Today, we're going to be focusing on the big chunky boy from the new Horus Heresy Saturnine box set, the Saturnine Terminator. See, this is also available as a kit as well now, a plastic kit, and the Heresy range. So I've built the model, built them together. Apart from the only things I didn't fix are the two guns. There are magnet slots for the guns if you want, or you could just fix them with a little bit of super glue and they can easily just break off the super glue joins. So prime the model in Vallejo black primer, and then using the airbrush we're applying some white ink to the areas where we want to be the brightest, and we are going to be going over this with a contrast paint via the airbrush. So what this white does is lay down the base coat for the model. So the brighter the area, the more intense the green will be. The darker the area, the less intense, and will almost be dark green. We'll also be using some dark green ink to enforce some of those shadow areas. But first of all, what we're doing is we're just applying the white ink directly through the airbrush, and where is it, the brightest points will be the brightest points for the green. Obviously the airbrush gives these natural gradients that we'd like, so I'm just imagining the sun is sort of coming down, the light point is coming down from the top right as you look at the screen, which would be his top left. So but usually you'd like the center or lower points of each sort of armour pane or area to be brighter, but just apply the highlights to whatever suits your particular needs. Mine was not overly realistic light sourcing. It's more that the areas I wanted to be brighter on the model, I added just more white ink over those areas. So just work your way around the model and apply that white ink where you want to be the brightest. Always remember to leave some dark, almost black in the shadows. Don't have too much brightness, otherwise the whole model's bright and it sort of doesn't sell the outcome that we're looking for. Right, once you're happy you've applied the highlights, we then get some the contrast paint, striking Scorpion Green, which is really bright green, and I use this for my Salamanders. I don't water this down at all, just straight through the airbrush, and apply this all over your armour panels, making sure you get good coverage, a couple of thin coats. Don't overspray this, otherwise you'll get some nasty spider webbing, and it will start dripping off. So just literally enough paint that covers it. So when you start getting that shine, move the airbrush away and work on another area, otherwise you'll get too much paint build up and it will start dripping off, and you don't want that to happen because it's a really hard thing to clear up. You usually, if you get that effect and you don't like it, you sort of have to start again. So take your time on this, a few short sharp sprays with the airbrush to cover that white, and then once that's all done and dry, I just have a bit of an accident there. Once that's all done and dry, I then cover all the armour panels using some AK Matte Varnish, and what that does is it just sort of sets the tone down a bit, takes a little bit of shine off, and just protects that green armour that we've just taken a while to create. Also notice here that I've left the shoulder pads black because we are going to be doing the lava-y flame effect on those. But if you didn't want to do that, you would just follow the same principles that we've done. So apply the white ink to the areas you want to be brighter, and just then put the green contrast over the top. after you've applied the varnish, and just before we move on to the next stage, which will be the metallics, I've just gone over all of the non-armour areas and painted those all in matte black, so sort of a colouring in stage, just applying a base coat just to bring it back, remove some of that green and white overspray that we've got, as I'm just showing there. So yeah, we're going to be moving on to the metallics. We'll be doing gold first, and I wanted a sort of slightly matte, non-metallic feel to this, but using metallics. We get that using some washes a bit later on, but first what I'm doing is I'm going to base coat all of the gold trim. I'm just going to show you how to do this on one of the shoulder pads, and then you just apply this over the rest of the model. But yeah, using AK burnt tin, which would be the sort of the Citadel version, which I can't remember the name now, but they're like Balthazar gold, just one of their dark metallics, the gold tones. Just base coat all of your gold areas in that, making sure you're just careful around any green areas, but obviously if it's around any of those black areas you can just colour those in with a black paint. So yeah, this is your first tone, and then after that we'll be applying our first highlight. Okay, our first highlight, once we've done the base coating of this, is going to be with AK Rusty Gold. And what we're doing is we're just applying the first highlight, which is pretty much an edge highlight around all of the gold area, and just apply this where the light catches and makes it a bit more shiny. Now you can get this by, if you look at the other shoulder pad, you can see where the light is shining and naturally reflects. So you can just follow those same principles when you're applying your metallic colours. So hold the model up to a light, make a mental note or take a photo of where those light sources are bouncing, and then apply your highlights to match that. It's not ultra realistic, but it does give a good feel of where those highlights are going to be. And with this large model you can go quite deep with your highlight. You can highlight the individual rivets, you can highlight sections in the middle so it looks like the sunlight is catching those inner curves. So just apply the highlights where you believe you would like them to be. Keep obviously matching that with the light effects you have on the model, so that the light flows through that natural effect that you're creating. And yeah, just tilt them if you're doing the edge highlights, just tilt the model to so your brush catches the edge, and just make sure you highlight those little rivet points. Again, don't over highlight, don't apply too much, but really I'm covering about 2/3 of the area, adding little scratches here and there, little dots, so that you're not going from dark to light. You're going to go from dark, and you can have little scratches and little dots leading into your lightest points. Okay, now on to our secondary highlight, and we're going to be using for this some AK Old Gold, and this is the next level of brightness. This would be sort of Retributor armour, and for this it's an edge highlight and a highlight of all your rivets, and then a highlight of all of your bright points. It's really good to put this next to dark areas, so you get the natural contrast between dark and light straight away. So you'd have your deepest shadows next to your brightest bright point, which makes the bright point look very bright and the dark point look even darker. So just work yourself around, ensuring that you're edge highlighting pretty much all of it and applying your bright point highlights where you'd like them. And for the final, I get some Citadel Stormhost Silver, mix that in, probably about 50-50 mix with some of the old gold, so you get sort of desaturated gold, but it's still really bright. And just do a final edge highlight, highlight some of the rivets, and add little dots of this, almost shine points where you want your brightest highlight to be. This stage is optional, or you could just use Stormhost Silver straight out of the pot as your sort of almost final highlight. And once you've done that, we're actually then going to apply a few washes. Notice how there I'm applying the paint there in little scratch marks, little dots, just to make some irregular shading, highlights. We're now going to use some, yes, like I said, some washes. So first off, we're going to be using AK Grim Brown, which is almost like Rhinox hide. Make a glaze out of this. So it's 1 drop of water and 3-4 drops. Sorry, 1 drop of paint, 3 to 4 drops of water. Make a really thin glaze of this. And what I'm doing is I'm applying this very carefully from the sort of so it applies a transition from your sort of mid-tone to your dark colour. So where we had that rusty gold, and then you've got the burnt tin next to it. So apply this glaze so that you're pushing the paint from your mid-tone down to your darkest area. And what it will do is it will create a nice natural transition for you, and it will also make your darker area even darker. And we're going to apply another glaze onto this later on as well to make it even darker as well. So this is optional. You could just go over with some Reichel Flesh Shade if you wanted to, just to sort of tone it down a little bit and then just bring back some of your brighter points. But I find just applying some different colours, some browns, some purples, you could even add some blues, any sorts of colour, sort of environmental colours as washes really helps sell that metallic effect, like it's reflecting back the sky or the ground, or a flame or a piece of something going on in the background. So where you've got your shadows, just apply this as a glaze, always remembering to push the paint into the more darker area. Where you leave the brush is where the most paint is going to be left, so ensure you don't leave a paint on where you want your brighter highlights. Where this is wet, you can maneuver the paint around. If you put it into the wrong place, quickly wash your brush off and then put some just water over that area where you've done it wrong, and it will soak that paint back up. So I've just reapplied some of the highlights just to bring them back. Like I was saying, we would have dulled some of those down a little bit. And Once this is showing you on one shoulder pad, so you just apply this same method around the rest of the shoulder pads and any other metallic areas that you want to paint as gold, including now the trim around the feet. Those two bottom sort of U shapes there. I only just put the burnt tin on those. I don't actually apply any highlights to those yet because we are going to be doing some OSL, some bounce lighting effect from the lava. So I'm not going to paint those yet because I don't want to waste time doing highlights on areas that we're actually going to be painting over again later. So I leave those for now. If you're not going to be doing those lighting effects that we've got, then just paint these, the trim of these, and I go over how to do these a bit later, but it's the exact same principles. So just place your highlighting in the areas where you'd like it to be brighter along the edges and just where it catches on those curves. And there we have all four shoulder pads done, all following the same principles of applying the darker brown glazes into those shadow areas. The next thing we're going to be doing is the silver, and for that we're going to be dry brushing. You don't have to dry brush, you could apply this all by brush and then wash it over with like a Nuln oil or an Agrax earth shade. But what I'm going to be doing here is using AK gunmetal. I actually am managing to do it via all that very small dry brush that I've got there on the left hand side, which will probably be a medium dry brush from the Citadel range, but these little Artify dry brushes are absolutely fantastic. And what I do here is just dry brush all of the metallics that you want. I wanted a slightly muted silver on this model. I really wanted the green, gold and obviously glowing effects from the lava to proper shine on this. I didn't want to detract it from the sort of exoskeleton. Plus, Salamanders are on that battlefield to the bitter end, so I wanted the sort of the frame silver metallic to be slightly darker. Plus, we're going to wash it down later on with a grimy colour. So yeah, just apply this as you normally would your silvers. I dry brush. You could do it all by paint. Just take care around all of your armour that you've got. Right, once you finish dry brushing, you can then apply a wash over everything. And for this, I'm using the War Painters, the Fanatics colour oil stains, sorry, which is, I would say it's actually a mix of sort of Agrax Earthshade and Nuln Oil. It's very dark, quite thick. I did add a couple of drops of water to it, as I didn't want a too heavy a wash over this. So you could get the same effect if you had sort of a 3-to-1 mix of Agrax Earthshade and Nuln Oil, obviously in favour of the Agrax Earthshade. But I apply a wash of this over all of my silver metallics, just to dull them down a bit and to just give a little bit of griminess underneath. And that's what I do. I don't do any further highlighting. I don't go over this with any brighter silvers. I just leave it as is. Okay, and you'll have to leave that for 10-15 minutes to dry. Once it's dry, I'm now going to be moving on to some glowing effects. So for this, we're going to start off with Wine Red from AK, and then use some AK Blood Red, a bit of white, and then a couple of fluorescent colours. But this is the glowing effects on the eyes, the mouth, the vent there on the top. There's the vents on the back of the model as well. I don't do this on the exhausts yet, just on some vents that are around the area. So what we're doing here is we're going to be creating a sort of fiery glow effect, like a heat exhaust, and this is done by having your dark colours and your light colours. So dark is cold, light is hot. So the lighter we go is where you want the heat to be coming from. So Wine Red is your dark colour, Blood Red is the mid-tone, then a white to make the fluorescent colours work, which is going to be a Frescent Red and a Frescent Orange. which I'll go over in a minute. But first of all, it's just a simple case of base coating all of the areas you want to be glowing with the wine red. Now the mouth, I make a couple of mistakes, but I go back and rectify them on the video. But it's the same principle that you're following here. Just the paint wasn't quite dry enough when I was applying it, and it all started to run together. So one thing I would say is just take care with this. The paint has to be bone dry before you apply the following layer, so just leave it time to dry. If you wanted to use Citadel colours, this wine red is a corn red, blood red is evil sun scarlet, and then you would use your skull white or whatever white you use. And the fluorescent paints, obviously GW don't make any fluorescent colours, so the Green Stuff World Frescent Red and the AK Frescent Orange. So once we've just finished adding the base coats for this, we're going to be moving on to the blood red now, which will be Evil Sun Scarlet from the Citadel range. Now this is where we're applying our first sort of glow. So on the lenses, on his eyes, we painted not only the lens but the surrounding area, so the entire eye area. With the blood red you just paint the lens. On the vents, aim the paint to where you want it to be bright. So on these vents, that's sort of in the middle. On the sort of these venty parts around his helmet, this is just where in the centre, little dots of this in the centre. On any vents at the back, I usually have the glowing coming from the middle. The exhaust vents we're going to be doing later with the airbrush. So this is the first time you're showing where your bright points are going to be. So obviously on the eyes, this is going to be on the lens, and on the vents, top, bottom, middle, just make sure it's consistent with any vents that are near them. On the sort of lenses of the torches or the lights, obviously the wine red covered the whole of the light, so this just covers like the eyes, the blood red just covers the lens. with the white now, you literally just add little dots of this where you want to be brightest. In some cases you don't actually have to add any white, so I don't add any on the top vent. By not adding white, you'll just create a muted glow, which is okay. You can get some really good effects, but if you add the white, you just then make a good base for the orange that we're going to apply a little bit after we've done the red. But these are just literally little dots of white in the places you want to be the brightest. See, the small lenses, it's just single dots. On the eye lens, it's just a little dot. And once your white is dry, we now grab our Frescent colours, so there'll be two of them. The first one we're going to apply is Green Stuff Well Frescent Red. This acts a little bit like a contrast paint. It's quite thick, but you don't want to apply it too thick. So just a little bit on the brush, and then just apply this over the whole of the vent, focusing that the paint leaves your brush finally on the white area, so the most of the paint is left over your white highlight, just so you get good coverage. Just one coat of this is needed. And then our final highlight is going to be with AK Frescent Orange, and this, you use this orange now very sparingly. Only cover the original white highlight that you did, so just add tiny little dots of this over where you originally had the white. Don't do this all over, this just applies a final little glow effect, the real highlight to your red glowing effects. With that done, we're now going to apply the same effect but over those large vents. So for this I use a white ink wash, which is a homemade brew, which uses Vallejo White Ink, contrast medium and water. So in the contrast medium pot I emptied about half of it out, added, and the mix is 1 part white ink, 1 part medium and a couple of parts water. So if you can make a big batch of that and then keep it in the contrast medium pot, just so it's always ready to go. If it's not inky enough, you can add some more white ink. So at first, if you just use the principle that I gave, 1 ink, 1 medium, a couple of waters, maybe 3 waters, you can add more white ink to it to thicken up a little bit. If it's too diluted, it becomes a bit of a chore. You've got to have multiple layers of this, and it does take a little while to dry because it's almost like you're adding a contrast paint, but it's pure white. But what you can see it does here, it's a little bit like an oil wash where it naturally seeps into the little grooves and it leaves the most paint in those grooves and recesses, which means it's brighter in the recesses and darker on the raised areas. So just apply this quite liberally over the 4 big vents that are around the back. I also am going to be painting I believe they're sort of like the teleporter parts on the top, like those energy cucumbers, for want of a better word. So again, same principle, apply this wash over the top of them. We're going to be applying some paint via the airbrush over those. So if you just apply it liberally, then the most paint's going to be left in the recesses, so those will be the bright points, and then we'll be doing some dry brushing as well to tone those down. Once that's all dry, it does take quite a while to dry, at least 15 minutes. We're then going to move over to the airbrush, and we're going to be using the Vallejo ink, white ink, through the airbrush, just to apply some overspray, which sort of gives the effect that the area is glowing and is giving bounce back light to areas. So apply this very carefully. A couple of little sprays, it's all that's needed, and what this will do is make your bright points even brighter and just give a little bit of overspray sort of to those inside areas, just to catch some of the light that we're going to be pushing into them. And with these teleporter parts, the brightest point is in the center, so just apply a little bit of white ink to those central areas. You see that I'm pointing the nozzle directly down so that the light is directly under the nozzle, and then overspraying outwards. Just if with this model it's kind of good, there's natural gaps so that the paint doesn't hit the top part of the armour, but if you're nervous about it, just use a little bit of masking tape or a bit of putty just to cover any areas you want to protect. Little sharp squirts of the nozzle is all that's needed here. Don't push that nozzle right back. You just need little sprays from the airbrush to cover these areas. Once that's done, we're now going to apply our first colour, which is going to be the Green Stuff World Frescent Red. And with that, I just, as you can see there, short sharp sprays to cover the vents in the fluorescent red. The more you add, the redder it gets, but can get slightly less fluorescent the more you add. So just add this until you're happy. Remember, it dries back a little bit duller, so 1 or 2 more sprays and then you'll be happy with that. So this is for the red glowing vents, and then for the blue at the top I use the Citadel Aethermatic blue contrast. Exactly the same principles, just very carefully apply some of that blue over the white ink, making sure you capture all of your white overspray areas as well to sell that blue glowing effect. Once the airbrush paint is dry, we then go back to our little white ink wash, and I'm just going to apply very carefully some just bits of this where I want the paint to be even brighter, because we're going to apply some orange and yellow over that in a minute. But yeah, where the paint where you want the bright heat source to be, so for me it's in the centre, I just apply a little bit of this white ink wash, couple of coats, just to get a good intensity. This part is optional, you don't have to do that, you can skip this bit. It really glows enough as it is, but I just apply a little bit as I wanted a slightly more intense glowing effect. See here, I'm also doing that with the blue on the top. This is sort of necessary because I want to add a highlight of a fluorescent colour, which sounds quite weird, But yeah, this is, I only apply this white ink now where I want it to be brightest. I don't apply it all over, so it's just over that central sort of area where I want the glow to be its most intense. And for the blue, I finally just get some pure white out of the pot and just apply little central dabs just to be really, really bright. going to highlight the blue first, and for that I make a little mix. I use some AK Frescent Green and some AK Sky Blue. Sky Blue is Blue Horror, I would think, from the Citadel range. They're just lightest sky blue. Make a sort of 50-50 mix of that. You create this sort of weird fluorescent-y mint green colour, but it's really good at highlighting a blue to give it a sort of otherworldly feel to it. So for this, I just, where it was white, you can see that I did some edge highlighting of white around the gold, just as if it was reflecting back. So I'm just using this to cover that white of the edge highlight, and then I'll also be painting where the white is in the central points. I'll be over painting the white in this fluorescent minty green colour. And once we've just finished doing that, as you can see, that I was applying some of that here, just where all that white, so you want to get rid of as much white as you can. For the flame vents on the back, the exhaust vents, we're just using our AK Frescent Orange, and there's another colour introduced is the AK Frescent Yellow. So where we've just painted in all of that white, cover all of the white with the Frescent Orange, going over some of the Frescent Red as well, so you get a nice little blend. And then the final one is, once that's dry, just apply some Frescent Yellow where you really want it bright, as so that's your brightest point. And then going back to how we did that blue, obviously you saw me doing some edge highlight in there. That's a sort of the object source lighting, so it's a really handy thing to sometimes sell a glowing effect, is to add a highlight to surrounding areas with that colour to really sell it, which is why I was applying it as an edge highlight and a little touch highlight on some of the rivets that were sticking out. It just helps sell the overall effect. It takes a little bit of practice to do, and it's a handy thing to have in the arsenal. So having the glowing effects is great, but then to have lighting on your main model that's reflecting back that glowing effect really helps sell it. It's the next sort of level that you can get to once you've done some of your glows. said before, what really sells light is dark, so I'm going to just do a little bit of dry brushing here. First off, I'm using some AK Oxford, which is a very, very dark blue colour. You would probably use Cantor blue, even Night Lord's blue, probably best. Very, very gently, hardly any paint on the dry brush, is I'm just going over the areas I want to darken back. So because the glowing effects is inside in the ridges, the top part of the ridges, so the raised areas, will naturally catch this colour and remove some of their glow and really make those central areas properly pop. So for this blue, I've used this blue, and then I also then dry brush in a little bit of AK Tenebrous Grey to darken it down even further. And I'll also apply that Tenebrous Grey as a dry brush over those rear glowing exhaust vents that we had as well. Again, just to really sell the glowing effect. So to make light even lighter, add some darkness surrounding it. There we go. The next stage is by far the longest stage, but a really good one, and that is adding the crackled lava effect on his 4 shoulder pads. So that's the effect we're going for there, dark red into bright yellow. And as you probably guessed, we're just going to be using exactly the same colours we've done before. So that's the AK Wine Red, AK Blood Red, then we use a little bit of white, then Frescent Red, Frescent Orange and Frescent Yellow. So the Citadel colours won't affect those fluorescents that we use. Also a little bit of Tenebrous Grey as well, and Anthracite Grey. But anyway, for the lava, you would use Corn Red and Evil Sun Scarlet, and then your white, and then your fluorescents. So the actual shoulder pad itself was base coated in AK Tenebrous Grey, which gives a lovely, almost black, dusty, rocky type colour. I then have watered down the wine red, which would be corn red if you wanted to use Citadel paints. It's probably a 50-50 mix, just so the red flows nicely off the brush. And what I'm actually doing here, once I've filled in those little vents at the top, is I am haphazardly creating crooked lines across the model, remembering that what I wanted to do was give some of that glowing effect around the edges of the trim as well, so it looked like it wasn't just ending at the trim, this lava was glowing around the trim. And all I'm doing here is straight crackly lines, like fault lines on a map, no rhyme or reason to what I'm doing here. Just making the shapes, remembering that I'm trying to replicate a lava effect with it cool at the top, the dark colour, and bright in its core, and just joining those little lines together, making smaller and smaller sections, like slabs of cold lava flowing through a river of lava. Takes a little bit of time, a little bit of practice, but I say they're very haphazard, so it's very forgiving. Don't make them too thick. These are 1-2 millimeters, maybe 3. If it's too thick, it becomes a little bit not real looking. It's almost like the thickness of the brush is the tip of the brush is how wide they are. Make them wide enough so that you can put blood red and some white in between, as those colours will be added as well. But this is just the base colour to give the coldest of the lava effect its base. Follow along. I've taken lots of photos of these, but don't try and replicate exactly what I've done. Come up with your own shapes. It'll be easier to do that. Don't try and mirror it exactly. It always ends up a little bit weird when we try and do that, but just create some little shapes and that. Okay, once you've done that, we now move on to the first highlight, which is with the blood red, thinned again, one little drop of water in there, like a little brush full of water, a few drops of paint, one drop of water. And now pretty much going over the wine red, but as a thin line in between it. So there's wine red either side with a blood red in the middle. So this is the sort of lava flow, and this is the glowing part of the lava. As we did with the lenses, remember that we covered the outside area all with wine red and the inner with the blood red, and that's what we're doing here. As I said, this would be in Citadel, this would be Evil Sun Scarlet, but that and blood red are very similar in their intensity, and you can already see that even though that wine red is quite dark, you're already getting a slight glowing effect just by using these two colours. So I'm covering probably 90% of the line through the centre, leaving pure wine red in some darker areas, but this blood red pretty much covers all of the line. We're following the same line but leaving wine red either side. Now we move over to our white. So it's a bit of white with a little bit of water, and what I'm going to do here, this is going to be the base like we did for the other glowing effects. This is the base for the fluorescent colour. So this is where you want to be your bright points. And what I did was I went with the principle of where those little joins are between the plates is where I wanted it to be bright. And I'm almost imagining the lava flowing from areas and then getting bright at certain areas. That's how I was picturing it in my mind. That actually the lava was coming from the vents, those 3 vents on the, or 4 vents should I say, on the left hand side there. But then it's flowing down the shoulder pad, and where there's those little crackle joints, that's where it'd be quite bright. Any areas where you've added a bit too much wine red, where the line is quite thick, like just there, that's where I've added a bright point, as if the lava's pooling. And of course inside those vents I add a little bit more white as well. But again, follow the same principles here that I'm doing on your own. Just make sure, yeah, those little joints, not too much. Probably 5-10% of all the line is covered here, but this white now goes in between the blood red, so you get white with blood red either side and then wine red either side that. So it's like a little lava sandwich. Once your white is dry, grab your green stuff world Frescent Red and then apply this over all of your lava effect, not the whole shoulder pad obviously, but now just paint this over all of the wine red, blood red and white. And what that will do is it will make the whole thing glow, but really sell that glowing effect on the white areas. And as we did with the previous glowing effect, grab your Frescent Orange and just go over the area that was white. And that was exactly the same principle as you remember we did with the other glowing effect. So yeah, only paint this over the points that you painted originally white, and this will help drive the intensity of your effect. And once that's done, I then go back to the white. This part is optional, you don't actually have to use the white here, but I wanted to really make the yellow pop out. So what I do now as the final base highlight for the frescent colour is apply some white on the areas that I really want to be bright, and this is just little dots, little marks here and there, very very little, too much and it will be oversold. And I apply this in the vents themselves, little dots of this in a couple of the vents, and just on areas where I thought the lava would be at its most hottest. And once this is done and the white is dry, then go over those areas and a little bit either side with the frescent yellow. there's your finished lava effect. And the last thing I want to do is just highlight those little plates of cold lava. And that's done with a little bit of AK Anthracite blue, but any dark bluish grey from the Citadel's okay. Dark Reaver, I think, would probably be a good colour. And all I do here is just a brush's width in from the edge of the Tenebrous Grey. I had little scratches and edge highlighting almost of your lava palettes, just to add a few bits of texture really to those that bits of cold lava. You don't have to do this, but it's very, you can hardly see it when you look at the model, but your mind plays tricks and has picked up that and gives a little bit more of a 3D feel, a bit more texture. And then once you've done that, that's your lava effect done on the shoulder pads. And sadly though, well, for me, you might not decide to, but I did this on the fronts and the backs, so you have to repeat that 4 times, but just follow the same principles. Don't try not to do the colours over all of the pads at the same time. Work on each pad individually, and just work yourself around. I mean, this was almost real time. This is probably the longest part, probably an hour and a half it will take to do all 4 shoulder pads. What I'm also going to do is I'm just going to take some photos, little still, well not photos, actually video, of the back stages, just to show what was going on. So unlike my own advice, I've done this, but just for you guys to show. There's the wine red or corn red, there's the blood red over the top, but within the wine red, then the white, and then after the white we applied the Frescent Red over everything, and then only over the areas that were we painted white is the Frescent Orange, and then we apply the same principles of a little bit more white on the areas we wanted to be the most brightest, hottest points, and the Frescent Orange, Yellow, keep saying orange, the Frescent Yellow over the top of that. And then we just edge highlight again with the Anthracite Grey, and that's all 4 shoulder pads done. And I have to admit, absolutely fantastic looking effect. I think that's quite easy to do, takes a little bit of practice, but gives you a nice hot lava effect across all 4 shoulder pads. And that's quite a lot of the model done. We're now going to be moving across to the weapons, and for the weapons we're going to be using the same colours and processes we've just done. So with our white ink mix, I apply this over the areas I want to be bright. Now I wanted to have a muted, almost plasma glow from this gun. I've got other plasma tutorials on the channel if you wanted it to be a bit brighter. You can follow along with those, but for this we're going for, again, a blue glowing effect and a fire glowing effect. So this gun has got the blue plasma glowing effect. The other gun there in the top left is going to have the fiery red effect. We're using the same palette of colours, so we've gone from white and then Aethermatic blue on this gun, with again another white highlight and a dry brush of the Oxford blue, and on the red glowing effect we're not going to be using yellow. What we're going to do is we're going to start with a base of AK Fluorescent Yellow Orange mix from Green Stuff World. It's a good colour as a base for your weaponry. It saves a couple of steps, gives a slightly different effect. But then Frescent Red, Tenebrous Grey is going to be used again To base coat those models, it's just the Vallejo black primer and then dry brushed with the gunmetal, just a rough dry brush over everything. I didn't put much detail into the guns as the glowing effects I wanted to catch the eye. Plus the guns are, again, a muted version of the framework. So there won't be much talking over this. I think the principles of what I'm doing are clear on the sort of the painting that I'm doing, but I will come back to you when I discuss how we do the flame effects on the gun, because there are some different type methods we use with the airbrush to get the effect we did. But certainly for this gun, it's like the teleporter blue glow, just the bright points, just paint with the white, go over it a little bit with the airbrush to give some overspray, and then apply the Aethermatic blue over the top with some white again for the highlights. With this gun, I apply quite a lot of white over this, over all of the pipes and the slots in the gun, so I really wanted this to glow. Okay, so as you can see here, I'm using that Green Stuff World Frescent Yellow Orange. I believe it's literally just almost a 50-50 mix of Frescent Yellow and Frescent Orange, but you can get it from Green Stuff World pre-mixed for you, so it saves you a job. And mixing fluorescent colours is quite tricky. They don't mix as well as you would as normal acrylics. But for this, I just go over the entire gun area that we've just done and airbrushed over with this colour. And already you get quite an intense glowing effect by using the airbrush to give the oversprays. But this is stage 1. Right, stage 2 uses the Fluorescent Red, and we use a few, say, techniques. Angles is probably a better word. What I'm doing here is I'm aiming the nozzle back towards the back of the gun so that it catches the top edges. I'm almost missing, I'm imagining the spray is coming out, right? The spray's coming out in a sort of pyramid, a triangle, right, of colour, and I want the paint to catch the edges of the gun. So the airbrush is probably only covering about half of the gun. The rest is going onto my hand or onto the mat. And what this does is it just catches the top edges, just leaves little bits. It's almost like dry brushing, but with an airbrush. And you're just catching those top edges. You're not leaving huge amounts in the recesses. And the red makes it glow even more, even though it's dulling down technically. It's really creating that fiery glow from the weapon. And the more of it you add, the less of the yellowy orange you're going to get. So the more of this, the less of that hotness you will have. And I just apply this all over the gun to get the intensity that I want. Again, spraying it away from the real areas you want to be hot, and having that, and just making sure I very rarely point the airbrush directly on the gun. It's always overspraying areas here and there, short sharp spurts from the airbrush. Don't hold it down for too long. Apply this into areas where you want it to be darker, and just using that sort of dry brush airbrush overspray to create some really good effects. Over the turret, I do focus it quite heavily on that little the turret points, because I wanted those darker, but don't point it directly into those nozzles, the sort of holes there, otherwise you'll miss out the glowing effect. And once that's done and you're happy with it and it's dry, grab the AK Tenebrous Grey and your dry brush, and what we're going to do here is I'm going to just dry brush this over all of the weapon so that it sort of catches the highest points to make them cold looking, especially over that turret at the end, the points there where its brightest point there at the end. So by applying this Tenebrous Grey as a dry brush effect, you create nice scratches and almost that heat effect that you get where it sort of has singed the metal and left a dusty grainy type effect. Very lightly dry brush this, working away, so I'm pulling the paint downwards, the brush downwards, away, sometimes back upwards where it doesn't really matter, but generally pushing it away from your brightest points to create those cold dark areas. With the weapons done, we're now moving on to the base. Now for the base I used some corkboard. I think it's only a couple of millimetre thick corkboard, not a centimetre, maybe 5mm thick corkboard. Ripped it out to make a earthy type shape, and I then used some gloss gel, acrylic medium. You can buy that for about £7 from the art store, it lasts forever. And I've applied it to the base, and I've applied it so that I'm moving the brush around so that you get some ridges, some sort of flowing areas to create our lava. And again, we're going to be using the same colours we've done before. So that's, first of all, we'll be creating our glow by using the white ink. So it was primed Vallejo black, and now using the airbrush, that is, I've shown this many times, that's a £30 airbrush from Fengda off of Amazon. It's not a £300-400 airbrush, it's a cheap airbrush. But I just want to show that you can get really good effects by using a cheap airbrush. You don't have to go very expensive. Those expensive airbrushes are nice, they're built solidly. I go through 2 of these or 3 of these airbrushes a year, so cost effectively I should get a nice one, but I find the nice ones are hard to maintain. They clog up easily. I'm happy to use these cheaper airbrushes without the risk of having to maintain something very expensive. So what I do here, this is just ink directly through, and like we did to create our glow on for the green armour, we use the same principle. So where you want it to be brighter, have the most ink and just let it naturally gradient away to almost black. Where you want it darker, so at first where that medium is just sort of where I've higgledy-piggledy placed it, I'm just following those shapes with the airbrush, nothing more than that, almost colouring in and then leaving that overspray. I then apply some overspray to the top of where the model's going to sit there, just to show that the glowing effect is going to be affecting the top part of the lava as well. So just follow along with what I'm doing here. Obviously you would have created your own shapes, but the principles are the same, just follow the shapes. You could just apply some textured earth stuff over as your lava and just do the same, but that acrylic medium does offer a little bit of gives a bit of shape, but you could do that same with some whatever texture you would use, basing texture, just flow the brush through it as if the lava was flowing. Here you can see I'm going to be aiming the brush, almost doing that dry brush airbrush that we're doing there. You can see I'm just catching the top ever so slightly, so it's sort of 50-50 or 25% on the base, 75% on where the model's going to sit on that corkboard there. I went over the corkboard with some texture, so it's just not flat cork, just to give a bit more life. So now we want to start adding our glow effect, so I'm going to be using the Frescent Yellow, and what I've done is I've actually watered the Frescent Yellow down with some Daler & Rowney Fluorescent Yellow ink, and I do that on this base for all of the colours. So I use Daler & Rowney Frescent Yellow ink, Frescent Red ink and Frescent Orange ink, and just do a 50-50 mix for each of those as I'm applying it. So for this one it's a 50-50 of the yellow Frescent ink and the Frescent Yellow from AK. Quite a lot of mouthfuls there. And now with this yellow, even though it's coming out green, don't tell me how that works, but yeah, when you paint the yellow on, it does come out green for some reason. Paint this all over your white, cover all of that white that you've just done with this Frescent Yellow. Don't press the nozzle down too much, because it will come out in huge pools and it will ruin the effect you're trying to do. So just very gently with the airbrush apply this yellow over all of your white and then give it a few minutes to dry. Once it's dried, then make a 50-50 mix of the Frescent Orange ink and AK Frescent Orange. Give it a good mix in your airbrush. And what I'm doing now is I'm pretty much covering all of the yellow with this Frescent Orange, but not complete coverage. You still want a little bit of opacity to see the yellow underneath. So on the top, it's pretty much I completely cover the yellow in the orange so that it's pure orange. On the base, just apply this. You want to leave a little bit of the yellow. So what you want to try and do here is take away that greenness by adding the orange. You take away the greenness, make it look yellow, and obviously give it that nice fiery orange glowing effect that we want. So just very gently, as you can see there, and quickly spraying this just to get the opacity levels to how I want it. So it's a mixture of yellows and oranges and deep oranges. Have a practice with this, have a play. You don't take away the brightness here, you're adding colour intensity. So you're changing the green yellow to a yellow orange. Now the fun part, this is where we really add some glow. So make a 50-50 mix of the Green Stuff World Frescent Red and the Daily and Rowney Frescent Red ink. I've got a bit of old napkin there that I just spray out just to get some of the flow painting. And what I'm doing here is that dry brushing, airbrushing effect. So I'm catching the top of the base with the Frescent Red, so that the top of that base area where the model's going to sit is almost pure fluorescent red. And then I'm pushing the airbrush downwards, keeping, as you can see that I'm keeping the airbrush pointing so it's going straight across my desk, and the base is at a height where I'm only catching the spray as it's only covering 50-40% of the area, so that the airbrush is almost dry brushing the top of the base to create layers of intensity, so that it doesn't go to the pure red. It's just catching areas like the top of the ridges and the top of the base where it's going to sit, so that this red now, even though you're darkening it down, you're adding intensity of glow, making it look like there's heat coming out of this lava. The red really sells the glowing effect. Without it, it's a little bit lost. But adding this fluorescent red really does boost the intensity of your glowing effect. With that done, I then add some Vallejo Red ink into the airbrush, and you really just cover this now over the where the model's going to sit. This darkens down the red. This dulls your glowing effect, so be careful. And I just apply this. over the top part of the base, again using that same principle of the dry brush airbrush, and where we've got some of the bigger ridges where they stick up the most, I apply some of this red ink just onto those areas just to darken them down a little bit, to break up that intensity. And then the next stage after this is I mix in a few drops of AK Tenebrous Grey, and I add this to the top part of the base where I want it to be really dark, and a few sprays of this over the lava flow where the lava would be its most coolest. So the bright yellow orange is its hottest, and the dark Tenebrous Grey is its coolest. And once you've done that, that is your lava base completed. We've just got one more stage with the airbrush to sell some glowing effect. Here, this part's optional, but it does help sell it, is final stage with the airbrush is work out where your model's going to sit and where that lava you want it glowing. I'm going to go, it's going to be sort of on those inner edges of the legs and a little bit on his groin armour. I don't do too much, you can do quite a lot of OSL effect on this if you wanted to. I just go for a little bit of subtlety, as I don't want to detract from some of those amazing effects we've already created. So for this I'm using the Citadel Evil Sun Scarlet. I'm using the air version, so I can just pour this straight into my airbrush. And just remembering those places, I now do little sprays just to where that glow would be on the armour. So just with intensity, you know, one spray, two sprays, the more sprays, the thicker the paint's going to be, the less transition you're going to have for your gradients. So just make sure you've still got a gradient from that dark green that we've got in those areas to the bright red, to the most intense colour. So a couple of sprays I usually do. It works out, the largest area would be one spray, and then narrower to two sprays, and even narrower to one spray. So your final spray is where the very central points that would be the most, that's catching that light the most. Getting this stage is optional, and you can add as much or as little as you want. Obviously, the more you add, the less effective it is, and you would start having to, the more you have over a wider area, you've got to use different colours to start transitioning, even a darker red. So once you've done that, I've then glued the model to the base, glued the arms on, and now we're just going to do some highlighting. So for the gold, it's the same, it's rusty gold and old gold to do the highlighting, but make sure you don't do a highlight right next to the leather at the lava effect. Yeah, so one thing we've got to keep in mind here if you're doing this highlight is that there will be a slight darkness between your highlights from the red glow to the highlight of the gold. So just ensure that when you're applying this highlight, you apply your highlight away from the glowing area. Don't have the red going straight into your highlight. Just leave a dark area, which we'll be filling in with a little bit of Tenebrous Grey in a minute. So these highlights I'm making on the opposite side just to keep them away, but it's the same principles, rusty gold into old gold. I don't do a top highlight with any silver here, just use those two mid-tone highlights. Now I want to add a little bit of highlighting for the glowing on the armour, and we're just using the same colours again, so blood red, white, frescent red, frescent orange. So the blood red, I just apply this almost just to intensify that red glow on around some of the areas, a little bit on the metal framework. Light will always be more intense, reflection will be more intense on the metals, so this reflected light, this bounce light, even though it will be bright on the armour, it will be not as intense as it would be on those metallic areas. So the gold around the leg and this bit of framework here will be quite an intense glow reflection, and we're going to show that by using the fluorescent colours. But what I do here is just intensify ever so slightly and do an edge highlight using this colour. Once that's done, I use a little bit of white and I do an edge highlight on the areas I want to be the most brightest, the most reflective of this colour. So that's over the gold trim, a little bit on the very bottom edge, and a little bit on the silver on the top. Again, the further away you would go, the lesser the reflection would be, unless it's on a metallic, and then you'd have a little bit more reflection there. And then I'll go over the white with the Frescent Red, and then I go over the areas that are metallic with the Frescent Orange, but only those areas, not over the armour areas. And it's just covering the whiteness with those colours to get the sort of bounce lighting glow effect. Okay, we can now do the final stage. I didn't do this before because I didn't know how much bounce lighting I was going to do. And this is the edge highlighting and battle damage of the armour panels. And for this I'm using AK Frog Green, fantastically named colour. I don't actually use any of that pistachio green, so ignore that. I just use some AK Frog Green, a little drop of water in there just to make it flow easier. If you were using the Citadel range, this would be Moot Green with a bit of Dawn Yellow mixed in, probably a 50-50 mix. But this Frog Green is that perfect colour for highlighting that green intensity we've got. So all I'm doing, main principle here, this is your standard edge highlight. But what I do, because one, I like the effect of some battle damage, I don't like a too clean model, and the second is that I have a slightly twitchy right hand. It takes me a lot of effort here to maintain a strong right hand so that I don't shake it as much. Is the battle damage, which is basically thicker edge highlighting, so it's adding more paint to areas that I want to be damaged. As you saw there, I'm adding scratches, scrapes, lines, almost stars of paint that are bullet holes, long drag lines there. So anywhere where you'd think there'd be battle damage, central points of panels, across edges where bullets have pinged off, bombs have gone off, it's you know, the bones of their enemies have been smashed up against them. All of that over the 10,000 years or so apply as much or as little as this if you want. If you don't want any battle damage, then edge highlight using this colour and the principles for edge highlighting, so twisting the model and using the corners of the brushes, all of that kind of stuff, making sure the paint flows. But I just like a little bit of battle damage. It just helps sell the sort of character and the lore of what we're trying to do here. It also makes up for a few mistakes here and there. It's a lot more forgiving a method. I would suggest doing it panel by panel. I show you here how to do, you know, quite a bit of it, and then I stop recording because it can be a bit monotonous watching me do this. And then once you've finished each panel or finished the model, just then go over any areas that you've created that battle damage in, cover those areas with a matte black colour. So I use the War Painter's matte black from Army Painter. Sorry, the War Paint's matte black from Army Painter, but you know, Abaddon black, any black will do here as long as it's not too overly shiny. And you just leave a little bit of that outline colour, the frog green highlight colour, and just fill those central points in with the black so that you leave the surround, which is the highlight of the damage. For the lines, I always tend to, the black line across the scratch goes above your green line, so it looks like that the light is bouncing off of the bottom edge of the scratch. Same with any dents and that, so just make sure you leave some of your highlight green around the black areas that you're painting, and that's your edge highlighting and battle damage. can see, I've just got some Tenebrous Grey, like I mentioned. I'm just adding that into that bottom area there, just to create a dark area before our highlights. Like I was saying, there's always going to be shadow after a highlight, otherwise it would be highlighted by the bright point. So I'm just adding a little bit of a darker area into there, just to help sell the glow, and just sort of almost reflect how light works on certain areas. And you can use this Tenebrous Grey to just intensify some of your dark shadow areas. I'm just using a little bit there just to pull that in. And that's it. That is your Saturnine Dreadnought complete, with lava glowing effects, blue glowing effects. So I hope you've really enjoyed this tutorial. I enjoyed making it. It's a fantastic model. As always, like, comment and subscribe. I really appreciate everything you guys come back with, and really appreciate you watching these videos. And as always, happy painting.